Tucker Carlson had Michael Shellenberger on. Shellenberger seems to be doing some tour now because I saw him on Glenn Beck saying that very possible that these drones over New Jersey were from a different planet because he doesn't think the Iranians have that type of technology. And
not even a year out from him having to apologize for accusing Brazil of some sort of coup-like activity over the Brazil Twitter files.
It would be illegal for the United States to be putting that technology up there. So more likely, probably from outer space.
Oh, sure.
Around New Jersey. And he's on Tucker Carlson's show. I got to be honest, I wasn't fully aware that Tucker still had a show.
It's on X, the video streaming platform.
He gets, I'm sure he gets a lot of right-wing views, but he doesn't have the same salience as he did in our culture back when he was on Fox. That was to be expected.
The machine makes the man, not the other way around. Sorry,
there
Tucker.
You go. And here is, we mentioned with Heather that there is an attempt when you have these type of huge catastrophes that are a function of climate change and the dynamic between the changing weather and how we've built our society, where and how we've built our society. And in LA, you've had virtually no rain for almost a year, and you had 70 to 100-mile wind gusts that were going on, and it just made it impossible to contain these fires. And this is a function of climate change. Everyone who studies this agrees, but the right wants to make it about competence. Even though you have firefighters who say we could have had 1,000 other firemen, it wouldn't have made a difference. They want to make it about who may have set the fires. This
DEI.
is really in DEI.
Karen Bass is
immigrants.
Ghana. Yeah.
And, you even saw this in the context of North Carolina when there were unprecedented floods in areas that had not been flooded before, and roads washed away, towns were destroyed. They couldn't necessarily talk about the local officials in these North Carolina towns, so they made it about FEMA. It's coming in to take away your money, your business and your house, and et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, so it was the federal government that time.
It's always about trying to distract from the primary point, which is climate change is real. And this is how the right-wingers address this stuff.
But I didn't know that. So it was really clear to the people who run the city and the state that you had this combination of dry conditions and heavy winds, high winds.
Yeah. And because there's so many ignitions, because of really these two factors, mostly the electrical wires, brushing up against, vegetation and triggering a fire. That's kind of one of the main ones. The other one is homeless people starting fires all over LA. Half of all fires put out by the...
Let's put up this graphic. Homeless people are starting fires in the map.
Second one. We looked this up, by the way, for sourcing because we just wanted to fact check this claim, and they get it from an LA Times study from 2021 that shows that around 54% of the fires responded to by the LAFD in that year were for fires that were set by homeless people. But as you can see, and Sam will say, where most unhoused people are concentrated is in downtown LA.
Now, and let's be clear, set by homeless people, all fires, well, I would say all fires that happen within the context of like where people are living, generally in some fashion or another, are set by people, right? Like it's people who
it says it in the article, caught fire, tents caught fire.
It's people who set up electrical lines. Occasionally you get a fire from a lightning bolt, but it's people who set up electrical lines. It is people who drop cigarettes. It's people who have forest, they campfires, and homeless people living downtown in LA. Undoubtedly, you have these small fires. They're trying to conflate these two things. because there's no indication that deep in the woods in the Palisades, there's a homeless person living there setting a fire. Or that it was the fire that, to the extent that people have any ideas of what happened in Altadena, it was a transformer that blew, and it was an electrical fire. But you got to bring in the homeless thing, even though, granted, it's fire, but it's not, it's very unlikely the cause of these two major fires. But you got to bring it in because we got to do some work on this.
The LA Fire Department are started by homeless people. It's been that way for years.
Why do homeless people start fires?
Well, it turns out meth heads love to start fires. There's just every drug has its kind of weird.
The question is, why do homeless people like to start fires? Well, first of all, you've got a canister of kerosene and you're cooking your food, or you got a candle because you don't have any batteries or a flashlight, and your tent catches on fire.
Or it can be cold. Some nights in LA, when there's no sun, it can get really low. I mean, in New York City, it gets even colder. And we know that here, there are fires that are sometimes started by unhoused folks. But the conditions aren't the same as in Los Angeles.
Just decrepit and gross. And look at how they jump. Why do they like to start fires? Not fires started by homeless people, the vast majority of which we have every reason to believe was accidental. Just like fires that were set in, you have low income fires in this city generally happen in low income situations because there's a lack of heat. We're going to use the stove for heat, or we got to put in a electric heater. Those are more prone to catching fire. Or the electrical system is bad in a building. But and then Shellenberger's first response is to talk about meth heads. I mean, is he suggesting that these are synonymous? That all homeless people, or the majority of homeless people,
well, they get
are
into
meth
that.
heads?
They get into it, yeah.
Okay, we can go back to
yeah, no, it's okay.
Well, it turns out meth heads love to start fires. There's just every drug has its kind of weird element to it, but meth heads love starting fires. They love destroying things. Like meth is like the drug of nihilism. So it's like perfect drug for LA and California at the moment.
So these are not cooking fires.
They could be cooking fires.
But starting fires to destroy things.
Yeah. For sure.
Meth addiction.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But it's not evil or anything.
No, totally fine. Yeah, what could go wrong?
But isn't classically starting fires and torturing animals, aren't those like signs of sociopathic behavior?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, look, meth makes you makes you psychopathic. It makes you psychotic. It's meth-induced psychosis. But I mean, yeah, and all the crazy. I mean, people behave. I mean, things that people do on meth. I mean, it's like they behave with like superhuman crazy powers. The levels of violence.
They're super soldiers.
I mean, you just when you interview people,
you are having an emotional breakdown right
that describe being on meth. I mean, they're just awake for like weeks at a time. Like it's not even clear how they.
You can't even make an argument anymore, can you?
So that's just that madness has continued, and and Mayor Bass.
I just want to remind you how quickly they skipped over. The idea of an electrical transformer catching on fire, which we know was the cause of the 2018 massive wildfires. And we know this happens over and over again. And we may very well find out it's the same thing with Altadena. Like, think about how much time they dedicated to psychoanalyzing all the meth homeless people who clearly on purpose light fires where there's zero evidence that the two most major fires were set on purpose or were from meth heads or from homeless people or from even people at this point.
We'll see. I mean, one of the fires I think Heather said maybe they think may have been started by somebody.
Out in the woods in Pasadena. In the Palisades.
But do you see how far he goes? He immediately jumps to meth heads. So apparently most of these fires are being started by meth heads. I thought he was going to go in the sense of like, if you're going to use heroin, you may cook it with a lighter. But then that would preclude everybody who smokes outside. If you smoke cigarettes, right, that's not included in this analysis. If you smoke cigarettes and drop it on the ground and it's still lit, like, wouldn't that be in a similar amount of fire that homeless people would be using to cook? No, it can't be that, because that would be rational. It has to be that they're meth heads who are so deranged. They're barely human, honestly, which means we can justify whatever we want to do to them. They're like super soldiers that stay up all day on meth, and they're nihilists trying to cause chaos, burning everything. That's what he's saying.
Michael Shellenberger knows that the best defense is a good offense, because Michael Shellenberger is exactly the type of liar who has been snowing people on this issue for decades and decades and decades. That's why Elon Musk picked him to be one of his journalists covering the Twitter files. More recently, Shellenberger wrote an article where he suggested that while climate change is happening, it's just not the end of the world and not even our most serious environmental problem. His entire bit is doing this balancing act between climate change is real, but actually capitalists and the people in power and fossil fuel companies, we don't actually need to do about them. We actually need to listen to them to how we solve it. He's a liar. And
he is not saying don't look at climate change, don't look at the fossil fuel executives, don't look up. Let's punch down at the people who are really the least powerful in society. They don't even have a family member that they can stay with, right? In many instances. Some of these folks are on the street. Some of them I know are experiencing mental health episodes. But the reality is they should be in housing. That might make it so that they could have heat.
Yeah, how do you solve drug addiction and homelessness? Is it with cops?
Yes.
In 2020, incidentally, it was a gender reveal party that started a massive El Dorado fire.
Right.
Wow, that sounds like meth head nihilism.
But again,
to me.
like, why is this stuff kindling all of a sudden? Like, it's not like homeless people started fires like the last couple of years. It's because massive droughts getting more and more regular because of climate change. The exact same thing that Schellenberg has been downplaying.
He's pulling this out of his ass because this is not the cause of this. And it is a way of distracting from all the other stuff that you're talking about, climate change. It's right-wing talking points just to basically, reinforce a completely distinct phenomena. And do we have any more? Do we need to even watch?
That's really basically it, I think, based on what I saw. It's unfortunate because it seems like this is the kind of thing that a lot of other media outlets are leaning into. Fox News, whatever. Like, I saw Daily Wire stuff. That's what they're all running with.
Let's analyze this, how this went down.
So, look, guys, the PG&E has been the cause of most of the most amount of fires that we have tracked. Okay?
Okay, this is exactly what Tucker and Shellenberger did, right? They concede that the electric company, in many respects, they know, like, if anybody knows that there's going to be wind, I got news for you. The electric company knows that there's going to be wind. They've been sued on this many times. Why do they not bury more of their power lines? Because it would cost them money. And it is likely, at least in Altadena, there is, to the extent that we have evidence of any start of this, it appears to be right now a transformer that blew. They have video of it. People are already starting a lawsuit based on it. Okay, so that is appropriate. Now, prepare yourself for a really in-depth examination of this policy of PG&E. This is just, Shellenberger and what's his face, Tucker, they touch on it and they just say it and then they just go into their whole homeless meth thing.
But they're right-wingers. Yeah.
But in this instance, we're going to hear more about PG&E because they're responsible for most of the fires. It's very likely they're responsible for at least one of these. High winds will explode transformers. Go.
So, look, guys, the PG&E has been the cause of most of the most amount of fires that we have tracked. Okay, that doesn't mean they're the only source of fires. And unfortunately, do homeless folks who are almost always the fire started by someone who's hooked on drugs. They're starting it for the drugs because you cook some of the drugs. Has that been a major source of fire here in LA over the last half a decade to a decade? Absolutely. Anyone who says that that's not true is just
pause it for 1
literally-
second. This is funny because it tracks almost exactly what the conversation with Shellenberger and Tucker were. But we know that the fires that are started either by homeless people accidentally or via them cooking their drugs or whatever it is that they're supposedly doing, and there's no definitive data on how these fires started. We know these are primarily in downtown LA. And we have no evidence that meth head homeless people are setting fires that turn into massive wildfires. Maybe there's one, like there was one gender reveal party that started a fire, but I don't think all gender reveal parties are, I'm not going to go into like the dynamics of gender reveal parties over and over again and talk about this. Like most of them are electrical companies.
Firefight.
But gender reveal parties did El Dorado. Let's talk about this for 15 minutes about how like, you got to be so proud.
We got to be honest about these gender reveal parties, guys.
The different genders that take place in these things. And like, like they're gonna be, they're so locked into their patriarchy that they gotta have they want to have like pink blankets for the gender reveal or blue, depending on who the gender is. And we go deep into that. No, that would be absurd. That would be absurd. Go ahead.
Fire here in LA over the last, half a decade to a decade. Absolutely. Anyone who says that that's not true is just literally indisputably lying to you. And I guess the reason they would lie to you is, we want to protect our unhoused neighbors, so let's cover up the fact that they're starting fires to get high. So, but remember, not all homeless people are the same. That's the minority of homeless people. We're not trying to be, say anything disparaging about homeless people. We're just telling you a reality, and you covering it up doesn't help at all. So.
Helping.
Well,
so shine some sunlight on it. If we're covering it up, shine some sunlight. I also use a lighter to cook my drugs, aka when I put my joint into my mouth and then light it like that. But I guess not people smoking pot in LA aren't being blamed for starting these wildfires.
That's what's so frustrating about this. Tucker and Shellenberger and Cenk and Anna do not have the solution to this problem of let's divorce entirely from the fires. Homelessness and addiction, they don't have jack for either of those things. All they have is let's throw more cops at the problem, which is what this country has been doing for a while. Rick Caruso, a billionaire developer, the guy you endorsed in the last thing, you think he has a solution to this?
Well, no. He does have a solution, and it is going to be
protect his mall.
Protect his mall, and then buy up all the property now that is burnt down at a huge discount.
Right. It's just absurd because we know that there are people of all different incomes that experience drug addiction. In California, tabloids cover it pretty well. There are celebrities who experience addiction and they're able to go to rehabilitation centers, which is a good thing.
Addiction's higher in West Virginia, but housing's cheaper there because, I guess less Carusos around.
And so the point is just that they're also making this assumption that the drugs happen first, as opposed to sometimes when people are unhoused and they've experienced financial immiseration, drugs are available and it's sometimes the only thing that helps them and gets them through the day. We all do our own things to cope and self-soothe. But people who are on the higher income part of our society, they can fall into addiction and then sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes they die and it's horrific. But sometimes they get help. But if you have not enough resources to even have an apartment or even have a friend or a family that you can stay with, and you're on the streets, you are unable to imagine any of those resources. And then the other part of this is, though, for solutions. The wealthy people that do drugs that I mentioned, and they may be using lighters, they're doing it in their home. And the problem is that there's not housing for these folks. So they're on the streets and they're in dangerous situations for themselves and that include, violence that is pushed against them caused against them as well.
But here's the sort of the grossest part about it. When Tucker and Shellenberger do it, and when Jesse Waters does it, and when the Young Turks do it. The grossest part is that, even if I was to stipulate that every homeless person who exists is a meth head.
Right.
And even if I was to stipulate that they all like to light stuff on fire, this This has nothing to do with what just happened. Yep. This has nothing to do with what just happened. Okay? Like, it would be if I was to say, you know, these fires in LA, people talk about them. But what about the people in Dresden who we firebombed and we destroyed the whole city and we lit that all up? Like, where are the Germans in this? You know, this is, yes, fire. I get it. Fire in LA. Right. But there is no evidence that this was started by a homeless person. There is every bit of evidence that the reason why this happened, the one but for, because if a homeless person lights their tent on fire because they do it because they're a crazy meth head, or they do it by mistake because they're on the, whatever it is, and it's on, underneath a bridge, it is not going to create a massive wildfire, leaving tens of thousands of people homeless and hundreds of billions of dollars, unless we have climate change and we have the impact of climate change and the failure of broad infrastructure to deal with this. You could get every single homeless person and have put them in the jail that you want to put them into, where they would all have been over the past 3 weeks. If you, a month ago, you had round up every single homeless person in LA, put them in the jail like you want to with all the cops that you want. Guess what difference that would have made with those fires? The only difference would be that there's probably less desperate homeless people out there having to inhale that smoke. That would be the only difference.
The structure of that segment's so revealing. The nod in the preamble toward the real issue. And then let's move quickly to emphasize whatever rhymes with the right-wing propaganda on the subject, 100%. Which is exactly what they did with the Colorado slum thing, which is like, oh yes, sure, maybe these are slumlords, but let's talk about the Venezuelan gang violence instead, which also, like this, they do not have an actual solution for.
Well, like, it's personal pathology. And this is we know why Tucker Carlson and Shellenberger blame homeless people for the systemic problems in society, because right-wingers, that's literally one of their, like, the modus operandi, is blame people who are less powerful so the powerful can get away with more. So then the question is why is the Young Turks doing that? Why and why? Care. I know you don't care, but I guess I don't care either. But I do think that it's notable that, you know, Rick Caruso, billionaire real estate developer and all that kind of thing, like, why not point at the developers and say, let's we have a problem of housing in this area where it's completely unaffordable and people are forced out onto the streets, punching up, because that's how you make change in society. When you punch down and then also don't provide real solutions, then it's just like I don't even care. Open question.
It's if the idea is that we are the existence of fire in LA compels us to talk about how homeless people are meth heads, not the majority. Are meth heads. Like, you're not just, like, whatever the motivation is for that, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Because what it is it's fundamentally a lie, because you are giving you are providing a false connection between these two stories. Okay? You're providing a false connection. You're skipping over the reality of the most, like, sort of relevant aspect of this story. Actually, two of them, which is maybe more than two, which is climate change, key elements of infrastructure, and the inability of society to sort of, like, square that circle. And in part because of the denial of climate change. And then what you're doing is you're providing more climate denial, because all of this stuff is about priorities.
Yep.
And the reason why Shellenberger and Tucker and Jesse Waters and probably every other right-wing show are prioritizing homeless people, or, you know, Karen Bass's trip to Ghana, is because they don't want to talk about the fundamental reality of what's going on and what fundamentally has to happen to deal with that problem. So, Dave from Jamaica, Cenk and Anna are disappointing, but at this point, stupidity would be a generous answer for their coverage. Like, again, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It is what it is. I don't care what the incentive structure for it is. I don't know. Listen,
I think it's genuine.
I think it's probably genuine. They probably genuinely believe the most important thing about this fire is the homeless meth heads who don't seem to have any connection to this fire.
Or, yeah, like, again, as you said, Karen Bass or whatever, when the systemic problems are what we need to be looking at right here.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.